Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Covering both sides of the big issues with the analysis you trust on News Radio 1040 WHO.
On the Davidson Family Dentistry Newsmaker line, we have a guest. And we want to talk to this particular individual because we want to find out why that building in Davenport came down and what's going to happen next. He is attorney Lin McCraw. Hi, how are you, sir? Appreciate you coming on.
Doing fine, sir. Doing fine.
So, painted bricks, apparently. I'm not even sure what they are, but they could have contributed to this failure of this building.
That's indeed a possibility, and it looks like a probability that was one contributing factor of many.
So you're a trial attorney. Obviously, the attorneys came out fairly quickly. They're involved with people now. The city is being sued. The landlord is being sued. The contractor's being sued. This is about a lot more than money, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's about public safety. And very often what happens when we have a disaster like this is when we can really see change in public safety, when we can expose the problems so that processes can be changed and we can all be made safer.
All right. Well, that's obviously something that's very, very important. So the city of Davenport, the building's former owner, they're also among the defendants. And this is going to be over quickly and settled, or is this going to be a trial? These things rarely get to trial.
Well, what I would expect here is there's going to be a period of discovery in which we sort out which defendants are culpable, which ones are not, who is more culpable, and who is more responsible than the other defendants, all according to Iowa law. We're going to see that play out over days and weeks and months. I would not expect this to be something that gets settled overnight. I would expect there to be some defendants that will settle out sooner rather than later. You'll have some defendants who may have extreme responsibility, but only so much funds. And in those situations, I would expect their insurers to tender their funds, and they're going to be more or less on the sidelines while the rest of the defendants fight out who is responsible and accountable for the remaining, the remaining damages.
Now, millions of Americans live in painted brick buildings. Should they be very worried right now?
It depends upon the building. This building showed signs. This collapse did not just happen overnight. There were extreme signs here. The brick was crumbling. It had been reported as crumbling. That entire sections were there were voids behind entire sections. Structural engineers were coming in at first saying, well, this is problematic, but probably not critical. And then before long, it was like, this is critical. Somebody's going to get hurt. And still nothing occurred, and people died. I mean, what you saw here was a progression.
Right, absolutely. So here's the reason why it's bad, because what it does is it traps moisture. It traps it inside the wall. That begins to erode the brick, wears it down over time, and if it gets left untreated, what happens is what happened. You're going to see it in bowed walls. You're going to see it with cracked floors. You're going to get warnings, and they got warnings like that in Iowa. This is the argument, but took no action. And as you just said, Lynn, people died.
Well, you can imagine this building was built in 1906, so you have a long period of time in which degradation has occurred. Now, once it gets started, painted brick is going to capture the moisture that's already in the brick. And, the brick had been there for well over 100 years. And then it gets painted, and then, of course, the moisture gets trapped, and then it starts to degrade, and then we have the problems that we have.
Right. Lin McCraw is a trial attorney. He heads up the McCraw Law Group. And he is also a past president of the Texas Trial Lawyers Association and is licensed to argue all the way up to the Supreme Court. the cases seem to take forever. I've kind of touched on this already. What's your best guess into when this will be done, do you think?
Well, I tell you what, when you start hazarding a guess on how long the case is going to take, you're going to find out that you're wrong. That's just the way.
You lawyers, I bet you don't even bet on the Cowboys, do you?
Yeah, I do expect it to take, for sure, it's going to take many months. I would say probably several years before you have the full fallout of this. But there will be some, like I said, there will be some defendants who will probably settle up fairly quickly. But I would expect it to take several years at a minimum.
It's really about insurance companies, isn't it? Because they're the ones that are going to take the hit here, so the financial hit. But obviously, we should not lose sight of the fact that people did indeed pass away, and our thoughts are obviously with their families while we start looking at the other side of it, why it happened, and why building collapses are things that really can often be avoided if only people would pay attention, right?
Well, absolutely. They can be avoided, especially whenever they're giving you signs and symptoms of, hey, there's a problem here. They need to be avoided in those situations. When it doesn't happen, people get hurt, people die. And then we have the legal mess that we have now.
People want to find out more about our guest. You go to the McCrawLawGroup.com. That's MCCRAW Law Group, all one word, obviously, .com. Lin, thanks very much for coming on. I really appreciate it, sir.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You take